So can you see my slides there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, thank you. I am, as it says, Naomi Marklew, and I'm a colleague of Catherine Davison-Brown, who was presenting this morning about our wellbeing activities, and she did actually mention this History Month display. So this is kind of giving you a little bit more information about what that actually was. So my job at Bill Bryson Library is a customer services coordinator. And I'm just trying to go on to my next slide. Here you go. So this is the outside the main entrance of the Bill Bryson Library. We have taken down those stop no admittance posters. This is quite an old photo, but just to give you an idea of what we look like. This is the main university library where we get a broad variety of library users, mainly university students and staff, but also members of the public, friends and family of students, contractors and other visitors. And part of delivering the excellent customer service that we strive to do means that we want to make the library a really welcoming and inclusive space for everyone who comes in. And we do this in all kinds of ways, but one aspect that I'm most involved with is in this area of user engagement. So I head up a team of really brilliant information assistants who are responsible for the displays and the user engagement within our dedicated display area at the entrance to the library. This is what it looks like. So we've got quite a big space just as you come into the library. And this display area is used all year round, both by our team and colleagues from within the library department, but also by members of the wider university community who can book a space with us. And a lot of our user engagement displays are organised and centred around particular events or campaigns that align with protected characteristics that are listed in the Equality Act 2010. So, for example, we annually mark Black History Month, Pride, Spring Festival, and a variety of religious holidays. And we also use our social media channels to widen the reach of our engagement. So these are just a few examples of posts that we've had over the last couple of years that just kind of highlight the range of things that we celebrate within our user engagement. So this paper is mainly just kind of a narrative case story. I'm just kind of going to tell you the story of how we did our first Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month this year. And I'll just pick out bits of learning as I'm going, and then there'll be a little summary at the end. So last summer, we were asked by the university EDI team to consider introducing a new engagement display onto our calendar that might celebrate the fact that Durham University has signed up to the Gypsies, Travellers, Roma, Showmen and Boaters into Higher Education Pledge. And this is part of the Inclusive Durham framework launched in 2024. So we started looking into this. One of our team went and drew up a list of all the items within our current collections that might be relevant to a display on this theme. But then when we got this list, we realised that it wasn't very long and it wasn't very diverse. So we were a bit stuck at this point. But very thankfully, in the autumn term, one of our faculty librarians was contacted by a professor in Durham's history department who had just received a research grant for his work into Gypsy Roma traveller history and culture. And he was wondering if the library could be used to host something to celebrate Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month. So we were very pleased to agree to this, and we arranged a meeting to start planning towards this Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month display. So we found out that the History Month was in June, and at that point we were in December. So we were confident that we had plenty of time to plan a brilliant campaign of information and inclusivity. And this is a case study because around about the same time as this, I'd been working on an equality impact assessment for displays within the library. And equality impact assessments, or EIAs, this was a completely new concept to me. So I had a lot of help from our EDI team within the university in doing this. And it turned out that they were also in the middle of overhauling their whole process for doing these. So the result was that I ended up being part of a departmental team to develop the EIA process for our university libraries and collections. And we got some really useful training and help from our EDI business partners. in what are EIAs and why do we do them. So I'll just paraphrase that for you now. So universities as public sector organisations have a legal responsibility to comply with the public sector equality duty in England, Scotland and Wales. This means that we should ensure that all our proposals, policies, practices and decision-making processes are fair, promote equality and inclusion by meeting the needs of our staff and students, and do not inadvertently discriminate against any group protected by the 2010 Equality Act. So it's a legal requirement, but there's no actual definitive way that you have to do this. So Durham, like most other organisations, has had to create its own process. And this process is the Equality Impact Assessment. So this slide shows you the list of protected characteristics that are listed in the Equality Act. And then just that note at the bottom there that because the Act is quite old now, it was in 2010, a lot of institutions have started to add further characteristics that they think should be protected. And for Durham University, one of those is socio-economic status. And this is the characteristic that we thought would be most likely to be impacted by a display that celebrated Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month. So it seemed like this would be a really good case study for this process. So this is just one page from the template for the EIA, and it shows how we consider all of these protected characteristics and what the impact, whether positive or negative, would be, and then how we would mitigate them if necessary. So to return to our History Month, we had this initial meeting with our faculty librarian for Arts and Humanities and the academic colleague from History in January, and we made this plan. So our display would include a bookshelf of resources, including new books that we would order to broaden our collections. We would have a set of 4 information panels on different aspects of Gypsy Roma Traveller history and culture. We would invite some guests from the Gypsy Roma Traveller community to be guest speakers at a programme of events, and we would also invite the university's Vice-Chancellor to launch the month of events. And this final point comes from a really key piece of learning that we got out of this meeting, which also highlighted the need for equality impact assessments. Because our academic colleague had experience of online abuse in the past when promoting GRT kind of themes on social media. So when he arrived at the library, we were really enthusiastic in our offer to promote Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month on our social media platforms, maybe even do some kind of social media takeover where all of our posts for a day would be dedicated to this theme. But this offer wasn't met with the same level of eagerness by our academic colleague. And he told us that the last time he posted about anything about GRT culture on Twitter, he'd had such bad comments directed towards him and the university that the post ended up being taken down. So for us, this is not something we'd previously encountered in our own social media campaigns. So we'd not considered these kind of negative impacts that a display might have on a community with protected characteristics. So this was one of the reasons why we wanted to invite the Vice-Chancellor to launch the display so that all of our positive messaging was really clearly being backed up by the university. And we also, for this reason, decided to approach the university's marketing and communications department to request a kind of official template response that we could use if we did attract any kind of negative feedback. So at this point in the year, the call for papers for this conference came out and the project seemed to fit very well with this theme. And so I submitted an abstract. And then in the weeks that followed that, we started looking at applying for some funding from our internal EDI department fund, so we could put on a programme of events. But then unfortunately, we discovered that the funding window was at the wrong point in the year and we wouldn't be able to have it. So we weren't able to, in the end, to have the whole programme of events that we'd hoped. But it did give us an opportunity to start thinking about what we could do after this month had finished and perhaps use the funding for that. And one of the ideas we're looking at is to extend the physical display into an online display that lasts for much longer than just 1 month. and to work together with museums, with colleagues in our museums and galleries teams who've done this before. So we then did a new equality impact assessment for this online exhibition. So this is from our new equality impact assessment, and it's how we filled it in just to look at the positive and negative impacts that this display might have on these groups. And just to look at the most relevant one, socio-economic background. I've just highlighted on this one something that we also learned from our EDI team in the process of this, was that one of the other negative impacts that there could be is the chilling effect. And this is not something that we were familiar with. So just to explain, the chilling effect describes the phenomenon where members of a particular group might choose not to be associated with that group due to fear of potential repercussions. So the chilling effect is basically a kind of self-censorship where marginalised people avoid publicly identifying with that marginal identity. So this was another negative impact that we learned about during this process, and we hadn't really considered it, that members of the Gypsy Roman traveller community might not actually even want to be identified with the activities and the display that we were doing. But in general, we decided that the positive impacts would outweigh the negative impacts, and that we could continue with what we were planning. And just to kind of finish with the process of an EIA, after you've looked at all the impacts, you would then make an action plan to how you're going to negate any negative impacts. And in this case, we thought that any potential negative impacts would be covered by our own accessibility guidelines and by our social media policy. So this helps us to see that overall the positive outweighs the negative, and it's worth pursuing this project. So to return to Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month, during the month of May, we got to work on the display itself. We found out that the university EDI team had appointed a student intern who was going to be helping out with this. So our academic colleague and the intern worked together to produce 4 information panels that would be part of our display. Our faculty librarian for arts and humanities put in an order with our acquisitions team to expand our collection of relevant literature on the recommendation of the academic colleagues. And members of my team helped to retrieve books from the library shelves, and we worked together to design posters and decorations for the display. So some of these posters were up advertising the events leading up to the start of June. We had confirmation that we did have some guest speakers coming for an in-person event, and we also had a short film that we could screen as part of that event. So we booked a room within the Bryson library, we publicised the event, and we set up an Eventbrite ticketing system. So bearing in mind the caution that we'd been advised to use regarding negative responses on social media, we decided not to advertise the event on any of our social media channels. And this was also a factor in using Eventbrite tickets so that we had an idea of who was going to attend. And then I also circulated a kind of a template response, like I said earlier, to the whole of the staff in the library, based on this second poster here, which is the university statement about this higher education pledge, so that we could use it if we did get any kind of negative feedback. Thankfully, we have only had positive feedback so far, and hope that just continues as well. So these are the results. These are 3 different pictures of our bookshelf display. So our library, probably like most others, has an ebook first policy when buying new material. So the list of new recommendations that had been put in with acquisitions had been added to our catalogue as online texts. And this is actually often the case that we find with any display that we make. A lot of the displays that we do are around protected characteristics, and we encourage library users to recommend new books under our Liberate My Library scheme, which is another EDI initiative, and then those books are generally bought as ebooks. So our solution for this, for making a bookshelf display when the majority of our titles are ebooks, is to print off the front covers and either make book bunting or display the cover artwork on easels. And we found that this makes our displays look far more visually appealing, as most of our physical books tend to have the dust jackets removed when they're processed, and that can make our displays look quite plain. So actually the problem of only having new books in electronic form is actually a bonus for us, because we can use the original cover art and have a much more colourful and appealing display. So we were hoping that the Vice-Chancellor would come and launch this on the 1st of June. Unfortunately, those plans fell through, but we are expecting our Chancellor, Fiona Hill, to come next week at the end of the month to visit and do a little bit of publicity around that. So we're looking forward to that visit. And then these are the posters that were created by our academic colleague and the EVI student intern. So these 4 panels, I'll just show you a little bit closer. The themes are Gypsy Roma traveller history, Roma migration, using the term GRTSB, and also some useful Romany phrases. And then for the event, this was the in-person event that we held on the 3rd of June with Professors Becky Taylor, Alex Barber, Damien Labar, and Hazel Marsh, who showed her film, A Basket Full of Eggs. And we had a really great turnout. We had to keep getting more chairs out as people arrived. And there was a really lively discussion between panel members and also the audience. And actually, there was an example of the chilling effect that I mentioned earlier, where one person said that they would feel really reluctant to contribute to an oral history project, as it felt like they'd be betraying their family. So kind of, yeah, it's an interesting perspective on when we're talking about participatory openness, like we were earlier. And then also another participant in this event commented on the posters that we were displaying, said, "My dad would be shocked by the useful Romany phrases poster. You can't tell the gorgers that. You can't let the outsiders know what our language means." So there were some really interesting perspectives that came out of this event. So to summarise, working on display and engagement activities for Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month has allowed us to create a robust equality impact assessment for this particular project, and also provided very useful learning around the kinds of impacts we should be considering when planning an activity that relates to protected characteristics. And more broadly than that, it helps us to think more constructively about the way we make our library spaces open, inclusive, and welcoming to everyone who uses them. Thank you.